Alright, cool. Yep, so this is the video of the making of Realm's Edge, which is the video game that me, Nelly, and Billy here were working on for the last kind of 12 to 14 weeks as a part of ENGR340 and ENGR340. Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to kind of make an opportunity to go over basically how we made this and a lot of our decisions that we made along the way, and how we got to the game that we made, and the things that we wanted to do, the things we couldn't do, and all that sort of thing. So this was our team. In the middle here we have Nelly. She worked on all of the visuals pretty much. So the UI, the UX, all of the HUD interfaces, all that sort of stuff. So she designed all the visuals for that. And then next to her we have Billy, and he did all of our like systems level programming, all of that really complicated code that really makes the game work. And then I was the lead game designer, and so I was designing how the game would play, and I was kind of the in-between between Nelly and Billy, and just kind of, okay, you know, now we have this UI element, and now I need to find out how to connect that into the game. So I was doing some more kind of basic level coding, but nonetheless stuff that really needed to be done. Cool. Yeah, so when we started off, I mean, I had the idea for this particular game about 8 years ago, when I first started 3D animation. We actually made a board game as one of our final projects, and we made all sorts of prototypes of different games we wanted to make, and this one didn't make the cut, and it was something that was still very fond to me and something I still really wanted to work on. And I've had many false starts of this over the years, and the thing is, it's just such an ambitious project that I could never really get it off the ground until this course, which was really good, because I mean, it's just a ton of work to get this sort of thing started, and I couldn't have done this without Belly. Without Billy or Nelly. Belly, put them together. And of course Simon, our lecturer, who was just great at encouraging us to kind of pursue this and to have a very hands-off approach, and let us just kind of get in and stuck in and do it, and not really kind of waste our time too much with lots of little tasks that we didn't really need to do. So when we started off, initially I wanted to jump right in, you know, week one, and start coding, and so I started following a lot of tutorials about other people who had made RTS games in Godot. And although I got the camera working, and I kind of was working on the drag box to be able to select units, and when Billy looked at it, he was like, well, hold on, are you checking every single unit in the scene every single time you make a drag box? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, that's going to be horribly efficient if you have a lot of characters in the scene. Every time you make a drag box, it needs to check everything, and it's just going to lag out the game. And I was like, oh, okay, all right. So he kind of was, him and another uni friend of ours, Peter, really kind of encouraged us to make some game documents, and to spend a lot of time really getting into the nitty-gritty of how this is all going to work, so that everyone's on the same page. So although the game is in my head and I understand how this is going to work, it was kind of a chance to make sure that everyone understood how this is going to work, and down to the very smallest detail. Cool, so this is the document that kind of came out of that. So we did, I'm quite dyslexic, so I found color coding things quite important. And so as we kind of got through this document, kind of went into kind of like, okay, what does the game absolutely need to have? And that got highlighted in green. Things that we would like to have that might be kind of difficult. And then things that would be cool to have, but probably can't do if it's really difficult. So it'd be kind of fun to go through this and kind of consider, okay, what did we actually be able to put in there? Was some things that we thought would be really hard end up being quite easy. Yeah, cool. And purple was just UI stuff, and that was just so Nelly could very quickly go through it and see what she needed to do. Story, right, so as you can see, we didn't get very far with this, and it was just kind of something that I kind of decided that wasn't particularly important. I read a ton, and I've been reading a lot of classics and old books, and I've really come to appreciate how difficult good writing really is. And I've come to really respect the fact that I'm not a writer. Although I can have a lot of ideas about world building and design, writing is just a skill that is something that just really wasn't worth us putting a lot of time into, and it was just something that was like, you know, this probably could have been highlighted and read because it wasn't super essential to the game, I think. So see, we kind of, there's been a 100-year war against, we just kind of, whatever, doesn't matter. But the gameplay and objective was quite important. So this game is a single-player, real-time strategy game, a survival game, where you gather resources, construct a base, muster an army, defend against attacks, and destroy the enemy. And funnily enough, that is exactly what we made. So that's pretty cool that we kind of nailed this to a T. It's always good to look back on and check. I kind of then we went over UI, so all the stuff that we would need. And this was a lot of kind of what Nelly would be kind of working on. So having a HUD, which stands for Heads Up Display, and that's kind of the information that you have on the screen that tells the player, you know, how much resources they have and so on. We had this kind of, we did a lot of research, and there's a long video somewhere where I sit down with Nelly and I just go over like 20 odd different RTS games, and we start talking about, okay, what's something that a lot of these games have, what are some games that have too much UI, what are some games that have great UI, and what are some games that have really bad UI, and how can we kind of learn lessons from this? And we found that a lot of games had what was called like a command card. And so some of the more popular games that I'm a really big fan of, like Age of Empires and StarCraft, they have like a little box in the corner of the screen that you can use to give commands to your units. And so we had like a build button, and that's the button that you push that is contextual. So when you push that button, it will then show you all the types of buildings that you can make. A repair button, so you can tell your units to, your workers probably, to repair buildings and so on. We actually ended up not being able to do this, and this is something that we put in here and we considered doing, and we thought it would probably be quite easy. But it was in yellow. It was like, well, it's not super essential. If we can do it, that'd be great, but it's probably not. We talked a lot about a minimal viable product in terms of what is the absolute bare minimum that we need for this to be a video game. And that wasn't super essential, and so it didn't actually end up making the cut. Attack move. So I thought this would be quite easy, and there is an attack move button in the game, and it actually doesn't do anything. And units by just default, they just automatically attack. So no, actually, something like it was one of those things where I wanted to have it in there, and we designed it, but we couldn't. We just ran out of time to connect it. Same with the stop button and the delete button. You actually can't delete things or stop things, which is kind of funny. Just didn't have time for it, unfortunately. Resources, food, wood, gold, stone, population. The population is kind of a weird one to talk about as a resource, but I think that it is, and I think as we kind of go through this, you'll start to understand how we considered your workers themselves as a resource in itself. But all of these were in the game, so that was consistent from the start. We started talking about different tile sets in terms of, well, it kind of began this idea where it actually started off as a board game, like I said, where it was a board game prototype, and being tile based. So I thought that would be a lot easier for us to accomplish, and it would simplify a lot of our design goals. And so these were the different kind of tile sets that you would have. We didn't end up being able to do dirt. I thought it would be super easy, but it was something that would have been really time consuming to add back in, and we only focused on grass, mountains, and forests. And talking about like a white border between them, which we didn't end up having, but it's pretty obvious. Yeah, so again, this document is getting really into the nitty-gritty about every single detail about the game, and we needed to really think about how we would describe things so that we could design them later on, and so that we're all kind of on the same page. So we kind of described like things as like, okay, so when you place a building, it's a foundation. When you begin building a building, it's now a construction. and when it's and then you have a building that is completed when it is now a full building can be used. And these are some of the different states, you know, like a building that's under attack, it's rubble, it goes red, it goes on fire. Also talking about like a low opacity version of the building where you're deciding where to place it, and it shows you kind of like a phantom of the building about where you want to put it. So these are all things that we considered quite early on, and these were the absolute essential building types that we needed. As you'll see later on, there's a lot more buildings that I wanted to put in, but I had to also kind of recognize that they weren't essential for the game, and that's something that we could probably add in later. In terms of units, we kept it real simple. Again, I had a lot more units, but what was absolutely essential for making this game, and that was a worker, a soldier who's only used to fighting, and an enemy unit. Now, we had an idea to have different cursors, so when your cursor goes over certain things, it'll be contextual. So if you are attacking unit, your cursor turns into a sword. If you're gathering a unit, you know, gathering a resource, then it would change into a gathering icon. We used an example like a scythe, and like a repair button. We Nelly designed all these, so we have all these cursors, and I just didn't have time to put it in, unfortunately. It wasn't a super high priority in terms of making the game. So sorry, Nelly, she couldn't actually put those in, but it's something that we can implement later on. So we need like menus in the game, and again, these are just things you have to really think about. So return to game settings, where you can alter certain settings like speed of the camera and volume and full screen and all that sort of stuff. Ironically, yeah, again, Nelly designed all these. They are actually in the game, but I had so much trouble. I had the variable that would change this, and it's so much trouble connecting that to where it would be changed. And it was so frustrating because it was like, okay, I know what needs to be changed, and I have the thing that changes it, but I can't connect them. And so that's something that will be continued to be kind of worked on and put in later on. A restart button was quite important, and save and load. It was something that we knew quite early on that would be quite difficult, and it's something that you would have had to design the game from the get-go to have that, because in order to save, you need to find a way to take a snapshot of the game so that can be loaded again later on, and so you need to keep track of everything that's made, where it is, all your current resources and that sort of thing. You could do it kind of lockstep, where it kind of replays the game from the very start and it gets back up to the position that it's in, or you can find a way to kind of take a snapshot of it. And that we kind of figured that it's not really that important. And in terms of game design, we decided that we wanted the game to be, one of our kind of design goals was to make the game quite simple, and we wanted the game to be quite fast-paced, where the player doesn't really, like, the games are only going to be like 3 to 10 minutes long at most, and we wanted the player not to get too invested into the current game that they're in, and to feel like if they've made a mistake, it's really quick and really easy just to start again and be like, okay, I invested too much into stone early on when I didn't really need that, and oh, should really close Messenger. Oh, it is closed. Otherwise it's going to be quite distracting. Signal. Oh, okay, that's strange. Okay. Anyway, I might get some interesting messages. Okay, and then we have like a main menu, where you launch the game, and that's where you can push play, quit, settings. Again, couldn't implement load. There's a build menu. I don't know why we didn't write anything here, but that's essentially just has all of the buildings that we defined early on here. So that opens up, and that gives you the ability to decide which building to place. Cool. So enemies, and so we just kind of had this idea. We got some advice from another uni friend of ours called Peter, and he was like, well, what if you just have like a basic enemy unit that just kind of goes towards the next thing that it can attack, and then you have a spawner, and that spawner creates these zombies that move out and go and attack. And we kind of wanted to kind of make some clever AI that do that. We didn't really have time for that, unfortunately. And that was kind of like this whole bit here where we're talking about like evolution points. And we thought, I thought this was a brilliant idea that Peter came up with. And essentially that your units could kind of change and adapt. The enemy units can change and adapt depending on how the main player is playing. And so, for example, like if the main player has made a lot of archer units, and the enemy zombies can kind of adjust themselves to kind of punish a player who's overcommitted to one unit type. So maybe they have less attack, but they have more speed, so they're able to jump onto the archers quicker. And that's assuming that archers have kind of lesser health to kind of adjust for the fact that they're a ranged unit. But then if the player has a lot of melee units, then maybe it has more health and more attack and less speed, because speed isn't as important about fighting a melee unit. And so it has this pool of evolution points that it can distribute across different stats. Obviously, we could do more than just health, strength, and speed. That was just kind of a small example. And that if you have these kind of lord or spawners on the map, if you kill them, then it's like creating like natural selection, and it makes all the other lords become more powerful, and the units that they spawn, it would increase their pool of evolution points. So now the units are even stronger, because what tends to happen with these sorts of games is you struggle quite early on as you're building a base and the enemies are attacking you, but then at some point you kind of hit this like critical point of like power where you have all the resources you need, you build a really strong army, and you've essentially won the game, but you're just waiting for your army just to kill everything. But we wanted it so that the enemy gets more difficult as you get more powerful. It seems like in a lot of these games, the enemy kind of has a cap. They kind of get to a certain power level, and then that's it. That's as strong as they get. But the player can keep getting more and more stronger. They can keep getting upgrades. They can keep gathering more and more resources. They could, and the game kind of gets easier and easier for them, to a point where it's almost boring. So we wanted to have it so like, no, the enemy isn't capped. The enemy keeps getting stronger and stronger. So there's a constant challenge throughout the game. But unfortunately, we didn't really have time to implement this. But it's something that we would like to do. Right. So early on, we needed to really consider like terminology. And so we really needed to talk a lot about, okay, we need to think about units need to be in certain states so that they can't perform multiple tasks at once. For example, I don't want a unit to be able to gather a resource and attack at the same time. So once it's in a state, it can only do that state until it's given a different command, and then they go into that different state. So this is where we start talking about action status. So it has a certain status. I love this. Note that this is a discussion we had to have quite early on about like, okay, how much would the units kind of figure out for themselves? And I was like, no, I want our units to be stupid. I want them to only do what they are assigned to do. So I had to kind of say, look, they're dumb, and only have minimal, if not any, self-preservation, and have no initiative. I really dislike when units go off and do things that I haven't told them to do, and I kind of go, no, I specifically gave you this command, and you have done something else entirely. So yeah, again, this is a real nitty-gritty of just stuff that it's like, okay, we need to make sure that that's something that we're all aware of and that we're all thinking about as we're developing this game. So all these are pretty self-explanatory. Idle state does nothing. When it has no tasks, it just sits there and does nothing. Movement state, it's moving. Construction state, gathering state, repairing state. Didn't have time for repairing state, as we mentioned earlier. There's like functionality, like we built functions in the game where like a heal function for buildings, but again, didn't really have time for it. And then attacking, and I talk a lot about damage and how we calculate damage and armor. It's pretty basic, but this is kind of funny actually. In the UI, I tell you that you have armor, but it's actually not set up, so we actually kind of lie to you. But that is something that we can put in. Also talking about different combat bonuses. This is something that kind of comes a lot from Age of Empires, where like a pikeman would have a bonus damage against cavalry, like spears are known to be quite good against cavalry. Cool. And buildings have armor, so on and so forth. Cool. Building terminology. Yeah, so we know this before. So foundation. We had to repeat a lot of things and go in more and more detail just so that we're all absolutely sure on how this worked. Construction status and how its HP increases as the build increases. It starts with a certain amount of HP the moment that the building starts, and then the HP increases in parallel with the construction speed. Cool, yeah, so, but not something we're able to implement. Complete a building, yep, when it's done, it performs its function. We're talking about critical damage buildings, so buildings that will take more damage when it's at low HP, and will slowly lose HP, so it catches fire, and it slowly burns down if it's not repaired. Again, not essential, but something we would have liked to put in. If a building is destroyed, all units inside it are killed. That is something we do have. Cool. Camera, edge pan, that was super important for me to have, so we did put that in. Acceleration, deceleration, smoothing. That's something we noticed a lot that these games had, and I really dislike it. To me, it's kind of in the same boat as like shooting games or action games that have motion blur. And I think motion blur is disgusting. I think that it kind of muddies the beautiful design that the team has designed, and it just makes the game look gross. And that's kind of how I felt about acceleration and deceleration. So in our game, if you just move the camera to the right, it flatly moves to the right, and that to me actually feels much better. Camera grip, got that. That took a little bit to get working properly. That's where you hold down a button and you move the camera around that. I had a lot of controls where you could invert the camera grip, increase this camera speed, but didn't have time to kind of implement that into the settings menu. WASD for the camera movement. This was just for kind of players who aren't familiar with the genre and will struggle using the mouse as efficiently as other players. And it was kind of like, it's not essential, but it ended up being just so easy to do that I just threw it in anyway. Same with zoom, seemed so easy to do, might as well put it in. Cool. Left click, so left click is selection, and it will select anything that it is clicked on. Ironically, left click does a lot more than just selecting units, and it's not something we kind of considered until much later on. Right click issues a command, and that's contextual, and that's where we have the certain cursors. So like if it attacks a unit, or you're building a building, or you're repairing it, or you know, so on and so forth. Yeah, attack move. Yeah, again, couldn't implement that. Having a hotkey associated with it as well. Left click and drag, absolutely essential. It's one of the first things we worked on. Control group, so the ability to save a selection of units and then recall them later on with a corresponding number by assigning it to a number and then recalling that number by pushing it. Didn't have time to do it. Probably won't be that difficult, but yeah, not super essential. Delete key, we don't have that. Double left clicking on a unit to select all of the same type would have been really nice to have. Probably not that tough to do, but not super essential. B for build, yep. To me, B, like the build menu always comes out with a B. For me, B for build is pretty normal. Escape brings up menu and cancels out of things. I think we do have that. Double right click to repair. No, so we don't have that. Cool. Yeah, I won't go fully into details to some of these things, but again, this is just sort of stuff that we did consider quite early on. So when you see the game, you kind of go, oh, it's missing a lot of features. It's just kind of going like, well, no, it's not that we didn't know. It's just that we had to be quite brutal about the features that we included and didn't include in order to finish, or have something that we could kind of hand in by the due date. Collision pathfinding. Funnily enough, buildings don't have collision at all, and we'll kind of get into later on how that was quite a difficult challenge. When a drag box is performed, yeah, and we're talking about, okay, so what does it mean when you make a drag box, and how does that, and so this is where we were talking about, like, okay, we'll use collisions rather than checking every single unit in the scene. So your drag box is a collision box, and units are a collider, and so any unit that collides with a collision box gets selected. And that's just being more clever about how we're doing this and using the engine. Grid and movement. Yeah, so we wanted units to kind of... So early on, we kind of weren't sure about how easy pathfinding would be. And so, because the whole game was based on a grid, we thought, well, you know, units would actually just teleport from square to square. And you would just alter the speed at which it has like a cooldown between each movement teleport. By the way, only adjacent squares. It's not teleporting to a different part of the map. It's just kind of teleporting. So we're thinking it's moving from square to square to square. It's actually just teleporting. It's not actually kind of like slowly moving. But ironically, what we ended up with does just slowly move. It ended up being too difficult to implement something like this, which we thought would be quite easy. Units cannot move through other units. They can. That was something where it was causing a lot of problems. And so it was a lot easier just to have them move. But they do have avoidance, so they will try to avoid other units. When they're put on top of each other, they will try to separate. Cool. Alright, game ticks, and this was really thinking about, like, okay, so if everything has cooldowns, and you're in a state, so you have a movement state that has a cooldown, or a gathering state that has a cooldown, and the cooldown is just a way of thinking of how fast do they perform that task, how fast do they move, and so, this ended up not being implemented at all, but this was just kind of like our way of kind of thinking about, so a tick happens in the game, it checks all the tasks they've performed before the next tick can happen, and it just kind of, it's called lockstep, where something step does that, locks it, next step, and it just kind of steps through as the game progresses. But didn't end up needing to use this. Oh yeah, so we go into the nitty-gritty about building placement, that it can only be placed on the correct tile type, and how we have identifiers, so a building has an ID, and a tile type has an ID, and it checks the IDs and makes sure that they're the same. Cool, yeah, so just a lot of nitty-gritty detail about this, but I won't go into this. It was something we implemented in the game, and I can talk a little bit about that. Buildings, resource management, and collection. So talking a lot about how you put a unit on a building, and it gathers that resource. That building could, like a lumber camp, say, can only be placed on trees. You put a worker on it, you start gathering wood. And just talking about the nitty-gritty of that. Cool. Alright, so early on I started thinking about, okay, just like ballparking some numbers, building types, so, you know, town center, house, lumber camp, mining camp, and farm, and this was all sort of essential stuff, but we had all these really cool ideas, like markets you can use to buy and sell resources. You could also garrison them on the markets to earn a bit more extra gold, because at the moment only houses generate gold, and they generate gold passively, as well as increasing your population space. But what if we could, like, have a market or a bank which is more effective at gathering gold, but it doesn't have the function of buying and selling, and it's more effective to put a worker on it to gather gold. Or maybe it doesn't gather gold and it makes the houses within the radius, so the building itself has a radius, and all the buildings within that require less food to be built. Or if you have a bank, it has all the buildings within its radius, it generates more gold passively. So we had all these really cool ideas, you know, being able to get upgrades, being able to get a church, and having priest units and stuff like this. You could upgrade buildings using the stonemason, which I thought was cool. All the military units didn't have time for, so we just have a barracks and we just create one soldier type unit. Cool, awesome. Sorry that was quite long. I promise you that was the most kind of verbose part of this video. The rest will be a lot shorter. But that was kind of the biggest part. The next thing we were kind of thinking about, or what Billy and Peter kind of assigned me to do, was to really step through the game in my head and really think about, you know, like how do I envision this game to be played, and really get into it in terms of, like, okay, the game starts, and a text box appears and tells you what to do. You start with this much resources. You start with a town center and this many workers. Now, I actually made a prototype of this game in the first year, and it was purely turn-based. And I used this a lot for, as you can see with the tile set, the squares are the units, and then you place the units on the building. So a lot of that functionality was already there, but this was a very, very simple system. This was done in processing, where basically it has nothing. You have to design everything yourself. You design your own engine. Billy gave me a lot of help in the first year with setting up the tile system, because that was kind of just beyond my understanding. But I use this a lot for kind of going over the game design. We looked at one game here, Frostpunk, and when the game contextually you do things like you can do certain laws, like for example you can have put in a law where you have child labor, and you're like, oh, this is a terrible thing, but I have to do this to help you survive. But then soon your people in the game will have a little text box, and they would go, oh, that's horrible, how could you do this to us? And I thought that was a really clever way of telling the story to you, or getting you immersed in the world without stopping the gameplay and without kind of being too intrusive. It just kind of gives you little kind of like contextual things, which I thought was quite cool. Yeah, so I just kind of walk through and I go like, okay, I have this much resources, and then I build a mining camp, and then that gathers me some more resources, and I talk about like how that produces resources as a worker gets put on it, and then you get a farm, and then you know, you slowly play this out, and I kind of walked through the game. And that was essential. That was really, really useful later on, and that was something that I thought a lot about as we were making the game, and be like, oh, this is quite... Whenever I got stuck, I would go back to that and kind of go, oh yeah, that's right, that's how I kind of designed it or thought about it. Next we have, there's a lecture that we had with Simon where he talked about a good way of storing variables and being able to alter variables later on. This ended up being quite invaluable. It designed a spreadsheet that has all the variables that, you know, let's see if we can zoom out a little bit, that you kind of thought that we would need. Some of these we didn't end up using, funnily enough, like the building size. Didn't end up needing to use that variable in the code. But essentially, we export this as a JSON file, which is a text file, and we can alter all of these values. And it will then be, because the game itself will call the values in this text file, it was a very quick way to be like, okay, I want to increase this resource, decrease this resource, increase its building time, decrease its building time, and so on and so forth. So this ended up being quite useful for being able to make quick changes. And we did the same for the unit data. Cool. Alright, so that took us a really long time to get a lot of the core systems in there. And so we started making all these checklists, and you can see there's some things we didn't end up really, like, so I, you know, like link the option menu. So I have all the things that I wanted to link, and I ended up didn't have time for it. So Nelly created the menu, and I implemented it in the game, but I didn't have time to implement the actual changing of the options. Which is quite frustrating. Credits! Nelly designed a credits thing. I literally ran out of time to put in a button that shows you a credits thing. And so here it is designed, and we have people who tested it. Cool, yeah, and so as you can see, there's a lot. There's a lot that we had to design, a lot that we had to put in. So this was kind of like the 30th. This was kind of like just over a week before it was due. And then this was like a couple of days before it was due, and this is where our sanity really started to slip, and we're starting to try to like, oh crap, this has a bug, this is a problem. So it was one way for us to kind of keep track of where we're at and what needs to be done. Cool, let's jump into the game. So we used Godot, and it's a lot. There's a lot going on here to get all of these elements. This is the command card that I was talking about, resources that are displayed to the player, the text box, that kind of tells the player what to do. When you select a unit, its stats, timer that tells them when they're going to get attacked, settings option, all that sort of stuff. All had to be linked, all had to be put in, all had to be coded, and all that sort of fun stuff. But let's just kind of jump in. So we push play. Finally, the loading screen ended up being kind of more complicated than we thought. Basically, when you push play, the game lags while it's trying to load the game. And I was like, oh, well, if I just show an image, and then 1 second later it calls the thing that starts the game, then it will lag while having the image up. And it ended up breaking it somehow. So Billy came up with a really clever fix. Cool. All right. So so your town center like naturally builds units like this, and it uses food, and it increases your population. And so the player, in order to have a steady growth, they probably need to start gathering food. So a farm is quite an important thing to start with. Because you kind of lose 50 food every time you make a worker, you want to make sure that you're gathering more than 50 food to have constant production. You also have a certain amount of population, so you need to build houses. I have a little description here that tells you how that works. I've implemented a whole bunch of stuff, so like if you just place it, you're done. That places the building. And you can hold down shift and you can click multiple times to place a building. Or I found I'm really proud of this feature where you could hold down shift and hold down left click, and you could just drag, and you could just smash out a whole bunch of buildings all at once, and that felt super satisfying. So as you can see, you know, I think gold, food, and wood was probably the most important resources, and so early on we made it so houses costed gold, and we realized that that was quite a problem because houses produce you gold. So if you spend all your gold without building a house, then you can't build any more houses to get gold. And so we're like, okay, we have to make it so that the building that produces a resource can't cost that same resource. So for example, lumber camps costed wood, but again, you need wood in order to build the lumber camp to gather wood. So if you spend all your wood, you can't get any more wood. And so we're kind of like, okay, alright, so we wanted to create this relationship between houses and lumber camps, so that houses cost wood and lumber camps cost gold. Houses give you gold, lumber camps give you wood. So as you build more and more lumber camps, you gather more wood, you can build more houses. Yeah, so Billy, I mean, he did some great stuff. We found out we had to turn off collision, so that when units jump out of a building, if they had collision, they would just freak out and just disappear off the screen, and then 5 minutes later they would come back from where they had disappeared off to, and be like, oh hello, I'm here again. So we ended up turning off collision, but they still have avoidance, so they will kind of spawn on top of each other, but they will then avoid each other, which was kind of a really clever way of doing it. So yeah, again, like that, this left click and drag, just something it's really dumb, but I'm really proud of it, because it makes the game feel really good, and we spent a lot of time really kind of considering how the game feels to play. Oh crap, okay. Enemy wave is coming. So these are the enemy lords we talked about, and they spawn units. Again, we didn't really have time to implement the evolution thing. We do have it so that each wave that comes to you progressively gets shorter and shorter, and also increases the amount of zombies that it produces. One really cool thing that I would have really liked to have implemented was units can build buildings while on a building. So like this unit here could or rather this unit here could build another lumber camp here, and essentially you could tunnel through like a forest or through a mountain. I thought that would be like a really clever idea, but again, just something we just really didn't have time for. But there's a really nice, like, we worked a lot on getting like a nice rhythm, or like this relationship between as you like one resource needs another resource in order to be gathered, and as your units get created at the town center, you assign them new tasks. So this is like this rhythm, like you get a new worker, you decide where they go, you build a new building as they have no more places to go, and so you're just constantly in this like loop of, what do I need now? Okay, I need more wood, so I'm going to build a lumber camp, and now I've got another person, so I'm going to put them on that lumber camp. Just really thinking about this gameplay rhythm. Alright, cool. So we made some units, and so from here, unfortunately we didn't really have time to implement like the enemy units getting stronger. All they do is produce more and more, so we would obviously want to add in more unit types, make the enemies a little bit more clever, balance a little bit with the amount of HP they have, how strong they are, and so on. But just having to be kind of realistic with the time that we had. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I ended up finding the gameplay loop quite addicting, where I probably could win the game, but I'm having so much fun kind of like in the loop of gathering more and more resources, that I almost don't even want to finish the game. I'm quite enjoying slowly building my base and getting stronger and stronger. And so that's where it's something where it's like, okay, if I'm getting stronger and stronger, so does the enemy, and that was something that we really didn't have time to really make work properly. I did have this kind of cool idea in terms of, although we didn't really have a story, I wanted to kind of really challenge myself, where instead of kind of beating the player over the head with like lots of text boxes, I wanted to make it so that we could tell a story kind of visually and through ideas. When your game starts, you get assigned a random name, and a lord, and if you lose, then you get assigned a different name and a different lord. Like, so say you get like a blue lord, and then you lose, and the next game you have a green lord, and that's kind of like who you're playing as. But then if you lose in the next game you have a green lord, your enemy is now like a undead looking blue lord that you were the previous game, and you kind of go, wait a minute, I'm fighting the guy that I lost against. And that was just something that we kind of very clever. How can we get a lot of mileage out of kind of smaller concepts? Yeah. And so this kind of, yeah, so if you're spending too long attacking, I wanted to make it so that your base kind of gets neglected and you have to kind of go back and perform a bunch of tasks. But it's all pretty simple. It's like we didn't really want to like overload the player too much. Alright, so the win condition is to kill all the enemy lords. So we should be able to kind of complete it there. Cool. So we're victorious. Nice. Alright. Yeah, I mean this was a ton of work. I mean my baby in this game was the building placement. I spent a lot of time working on this. I had a little bit of help from Billy. No, I mean he did help a lot actually. But as you can see, it's a lot, and you have to really consider like, okay, well, when you hover your mouse over the HUDs, that it displays to you the correct information, and we grab that information from the spreadsheet, so we need to call the information from that and then place it in the right place, and then when your mouse goes over to a different button, we need to hide the previous information and show the new information, and just lots of little stuff like this where you have to be just like really practical coding. It's not super complicated, but it does just take a bit of time to think about how you're going to do it. We broke this up into different functions, so process like the hotkey that the player pushes, you get that building, and then you display a preview of that building, and then if they left click, you place that building. We broke this up into lots of different things. Same with the building management. Where is the building manager? It should be. I think it's just. It's on each building has their own building manager, and it manages kind of how that building functions and how it kind of gathers resources. So I think it's here, building manager. Here we are. Yeah, it's just a lot in terms of it has its own health bar and its own gathering rate. We need to get the information from the spreadsheet and implement it all here. So yeah, I mean this was a ton of work. I think what we have is a great base, or a great place to kind of start. And there's just, now that the systems are all set up, that now we can add more building types, and we can fix some of the bugs that we have. We can add more unit types. We can kind of work on the enemies a little bit more. So it's all here. It's just now a matter of just something that we can keep working on. And it's something I'm very proud of. I think I'm very grateful to be given an opportunity to finally be able to make this, because now it's something that I can continue working on. Whereas to begin something like this, to start something like this, is such a huge undertaking that it would be probably impossible to do while you have a full-time job. And something that, when I had a full-time job, I tried multiple times and it was just too much. So very grateful to Billy and to Nelly. They worked really, really hard on this, and I think we made something that I'm quite proud of. I know it's probably quite unfinished, and I feel in my heart of hearts it is unfinished. But the base is there. The basis of the game is working, and now it's just a matter of just small little, like an hour here and there, just adding more and more things and getting working. So yeah, I'm really happy. I'm really grateful to Simon for giving us this opportunity to be able to make this, giving us some really great advice, and being just really supportive of what we're doing. So the next step from here is you can kind of package the game and turn it into an executable, but for some reason it has some problems, and we need to just fix that. And then once we fix that, we can actually put it onto a website, so anyone can kind of play it and test it, and give us feedback. I would like to, we used a free tile set, but I would like to use my 3D animation skills to develop to model everything myself, and then just render that out as an image and use that as the sprites. There are character animations, I just couldn't link them properly. Buildings can catch fire, which is kind of cool. So it's all there. It's just now I can continue working on it as much as I want. So yeah, cool. Well, I hope you guys really enjoyed that. If you have any thoughts, any feedback, anything that I maybe forgot to cover, I'd love to answer your questions in the chat. So let me know. Thank you so much for watching. And yeah, I'll look forward to hearing what everyone thinks about it.